Chapter 16, Gunshots. The gunshots sounded at first like small firecrackers rather than anything dangerous. They came one, then another, and another, echoing between the buildings of the apartment complexes behind Indian Creek Elementary at about 10:40 Sunday morning. When the shooting was finished, Tito, the librarian whom Osman had recruited to the under-15s, who had cheered the Fugees on to victory the day before, was covered in blood and shot in the face. The exact circumstances of the shooting were murky. A few details were given to police by witnesses. Tito and some fellow librarians were walking up the street when they ran into an African-American teenager they knew, walking with his mother and her boyfriend. An argument ensued. The kids on the team heard that the argument had to do with territory and gangs. The shooter was in a gang of American kids. Tito and his fellow librarians, who identified themselves as members of a gang called the Africans, were walking on the wrong turf. The American teenager whipped out a small caliber pistol and began shooting. Everyone ran, including the shooter, who dashed back to his apartment. When the police arrived a few minutes later, they found the American kid's mother at the scene of the shooting, picking up the shells that had discharged from her son's weapon. She claimed her son had been in their apartment all morning, asleep, but eyewitnesses of the shooting identified the 16-year-old as the shooter, and DeKalb County police officers handcuffed him and loaded him into the back seat of their black and gray squad car. Tito himself was lucky. The bullet had crashed into his chin and ripped through his jaw. A little lower, and it would have cut through his neck, spinal cord, or carotid arteries. A few inches higher, and it might have entered his brain. Tito, on this day, would survive. Luma was shaken by the news. She worried about her other players. Rival gang members knew that Tito had been practicing with the Fugees, with his close friend Osman, and everyone in Clarkston knew exactly where and when the Fugees practiced. Luma feared gang members might show up to try to take revenge for their friend who had been arrested. She canceled practices and got the word out to her players not to show up at the field at Indian Creek until further notice. She drew a hard line with Tito and Osman as well. None of the Fugees had heard of a gang called the Africans, and many thought Tito had been bluffing to frighten the American boy when he claimed to be in such a gang. Luma wasn't sure, but even pretending to be part of a gang was enough for her. Tito and Osman were to have nothing to do with her soccer program ever again. For Luma, it was difficult to imagine ever feeling safe on the field at Indian Creek Elementary. The field was next door to the apartment complex where the shooter lived, which Luma now knew was also considered the territory of a street gang in conflict with some of her own, now former players. The field at Indian Creek was a free-for-all in the afternoons. There were no fences around the property, and neighborhood teenagers were constantly popping out of the surrounding woods. It would be impossible to sort out a stranger who was simply taking a shortcut by walking across the field from one with bad intentions. Luma had promised her players' parents she would keep them safe. She wasn't sure she could keep that promise at Indian Creek. On Tuesday night, Luma would have a chance to improve things for her team if she could convince the Clarkston City Council to let her use the city's field in Milan Park.